I'll structure this video in two parts. First, I will help you to brainstorm for such stories from your professional career, and in the second part, I will demonstrate 3 complete examples of possible answers to this interview question. One of the most common misconceptions when being asked this question is that you must have some sort of total failure just in order to think of a good enough answer. When the reality is that no matter if you're applying for a VP of product or an SD level 1, it's just normal and natural to have failures, and even recommended to have them in your life. And in fact, one of the main reasons why interviewers ask this one question so often is that it's impossible not to have failures in your career. And this includes the scenario of recent graduates. A failure story should be an important event from your career. For instance, it could be a significant project that you've done in school which had a real impact on you, or if you're already in the work field, it could be that you maybe missed an important deadline sometime, or maybe you failed to coach one of your teammates which resulted in a poor performance of your team, or maybe you failed to take the lead on some project, and it doesn't have to be a team project, by the way. On my end, I used to fail most of my YouTube videos, and I failed many other projects throughout my life. Also interesting to mention here is that this question can come in many flavors, and here are some examples. Now, there are some tips and tricks when it comes to answering failure stories. And the first one of them is to avoid putting yourself in a bad light, to make you look like a really bad hire here. For example, if you're applying for a project management role and you've just been laid off because you missed a deadline 2 months ago, maybe you should pick a better example. And the second piece of advice here is to really understand why they're asking you this question. And it's, of course, to test your storytelling skills. Storytelling is hugely important at Amazon. But it's also to understand how you think, how likable are you, how easy to work with are you, and very importantly, if you learn from your mistakes. So maybe it will be easier if I demo you some examples here. I remember it was a while ago, at the time that I started to write my first production level code, that because I didn't follow a specific procedure, our server crashed. And however, it wasn't anything too serious. I mean, we quickly resolved it and we just moved on. So although this was an actual failure story from someone's career, this was a very bad answer, and there are a couple of reasons for this. First is that this really sounded boring, like a code enumeration, and the candidate wasn't willing to invest more brain cycles into telling a proper story. And we don't know where the candidate worked at, the name of the company, we don't know what the project was about, we don't know the team size, we don't know if it was a big or a small project, and essentially all the details that will help you to better understand, that will help put context to your story. Then the second remark here is, of course, it was a very brief answer, and you should keep it around 1 minute or so, in my opinion. And any behavioral story must follow more or less the STAR format to answer it. That is, to describe a situation, like I just mentioned, describe the task that was required for the situation, and then the actions that you had to take in the situation. Here we just said, like, okay, we just fixed it and moved on. And then the result. In this case, it was nothing really serious, nothing really that serious, which is, of course, sugarcoating it, which is not good at all. So the reason why this STAR format is important is not to forget any part of your story, and this comes in quite handy when you give longer answers, where you have a tendency to focus on certain aspects while willing to go faster on others. So let's see now how this could have been done a bit better. Let me tell you about a quick story. At the time that I was just getting started with my software development career, I was then working for a company named The Game, and they were actually quite good at developing and customizing 3D gaming engines, which I thought was quite a fun place to work at, and why not to develop my tools of the trade. So after a successful 6 months apprenticeship, they promoted me into a small team of 5 developers that was in charge of a small game that received a good 10,000 people playing it each month. So again, I was quite excited about this and started to work hard on delivering new features. So after 1 year, my project manager even put me in a leadership role to be in charge of our next release. It was an incremental release of that still beta version. So again, excited. I instead of taking my leadership role seriously, I started again to work even harder than before on delivering even more feature for that game. And this actually proved to be a critical mistake because the release was, simply put, an epic fail, because during the day of the release in the morning, we just spotted a few last minute bugs that we had to fix. And then in the afternoon, after we just released, and a few hours after I got home, I was notified that our server actually crashed completely. So there was no magic solution to this, but just to roll back to the previous version. So my main learning from this story was that I should have assumed my leadership role more seriously. I should have taken ownership and think on the long term, that is to make that new version be a stable one, a reliable one, instead of just thinking on short term to deliver ever more features to our user base. So I believe that this, although this is a lesson that I learned the hard way, it's quite a good example that helped me to grow my career. All right, so this was a much better example, and let's take a look at some of the key elements that allow this to happen. First, I did spend the first 2 paragraphs talking about the situation, putting things into a context here. And this is not because I wanted to follow the star format, but because I really wanted to immerse my viewer into my world, because this way it would be a lot easier for them to relate to my story. The second key element here is that I really try to focus on the main skills that are required for an SD role, that is to be helpful and to be hardworking. Next is that I didn't sugarcoat my failure. I did say it was an epic fail, and I didn't say it was somebody else's fail or a collective failure or anything like this. I just said it's a failure, which I assumed. Then in the same way that I spend a lot of time to put things into context, I also spend a lot of time to focus on the learnings of this project. And notice here that the learnings of this project are quite significant, because they are actually the second most important principle at Amazon, that of ownership. And if you look at the ownership principle, it really talks about focusing on long-term success than on short-term goals. So also, last but not least here, notice that I didn't say what type of game it was. Was it a 3D shooter or just a strategy game? And I intentionally omitted too much of a detail here, and this is especially because I wanted to be the starting point of a conversation between me and the other party here. So I believe this is a pretty good example for our purpose. I believe the best example here would be to talk about the time when I led a team of 9 people at a company named Sierra Developers. Our project was for a Fortune 50 client in the banking industry, and essentially consisted of us having to deliver a working prototype of a transaction approval system backed by blockchain technology. So we were actually up to a pretty slow start. It took us 2 months to deliver an alpha version so that we could receive feedback from our client. And this wasn't because we were not getting along, I was not getting along well with my team, and it was quite in fact the opposite, that we set an idealistic goal to deliver a system that's able to process up to 3 transactions per second here. And this turned out in fact to be not the main highlight of the system, because the client was more interested in an easy to use system that they could demo internally, because after all it was just a working prototype here. So as a matter of fact, because of the shift in focus, the project timeline spiraled, and it actually took us 5 months to deliver on this project. So the main takeaway from this one is that I should have really taken more seriously the first and the most important of the 12 leaderships of the agile management strategy, that is to iterate as fast as possible to the client with valuable releases. And also I think that rhymes quite well with Amazon's most important leadership principles, that of customer obsession. So I made this final example for project management roles, that is the technical ones, and I designed them to focus on Amazon's most important of 14 leadership principles, that of customer obsession. Had I employed a faster delivery schedule, I would have had a chance to understand that the client was valuing a lot more an easier to use system, which would have allowed me to deliver this prototype faster. Also notice here that I subtly mentioned that this wasn't because my team and I weren't getting along too well, but because we were being too idealistic here. And this is not an excuse, but I try to frame it as a good enough reason for me to be likable, to be a person that's easy to work with here. Now, another thing to understand here is that is this project a major failure? Is this project going to put me in a bad situation, in a bad light when applying for a project management job? Well, I don't think so, and this is because of two reasons. First, because I think we're talking about the blockchain project, and we're talking about the past project, which is blockchain is innovation, so this is understandable. And the second reason, we're talking about a prototype. And it's not unheard of to have a 2 months delay in delivering any type of prototype here. And this is why I believe this won't risk putting me in a bad light. I mean, had I said that my project was for a Fortune 50 bank and there was a mission critical security project, yes, that would have been a bad example. But this one, I think it's fine. Now, another thing that I wanted to highlight here is that I didn't give too much of a detail to this project. Blockchain is quite exciting, and if you're in a technical role and if you understand blockchain, there are many other constraints and many other interesting details that could have been mentioned there. So this is especially because I wanted to invite my audience to start the conversation here. So last but not least, maybe also worthwhile mentioning here that I did do my best to keep it around 2 minutes, around the 2 minutes mark. And I believe this is also the reason why it took slightly longer than the other one, is because we're talking about an innovative technology that required a bit more of an explanation. And just as a final piece of advice here, if you want to get better at storytelling and if your time allows, I found that reading a few autobiographies to be a great strategy to improve here. So there you go. I hope you found this information useful, and I'll see you in the next one.